What would you do if one morning the person lying next to you felt like a complete stranger? Grace had been married for 35 years. To the outside world, it was a stable, quiet marriage. But on one silent morning, with no words and no warmth, she realized nothing was left between them but silence. It didn't happen overnight. It was the quiet result of years of drifting apart, day by day, word by unspoken word. Today's story is about a woman who found the courage to walk away, not from a bad man, but from a life where she no longer existed. Grace Wallace didn't remember when the silence began. Maybe it was after their youngest left for college. Maybe it started long before that, quietly, like a crack forming in a porcelain plate, invisible until it split the whole thing in two. It was a Thursday morning in early spring. The kind of morning where the air still held a winter chill, but the sunlight danced on the kitchen counter like it was trying to promise better days. Grace moved through her morning routine like clockwork. Coffee brewing, eggs scrambling, 2 slices of toast, 1 buttered, 1 dry, just the way he liked it. Michael sat at the table, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, eyes fixed on the Wall Street Journal. He didn't glance up when she set his mug down. He didn't notice that she had used his favorite cup, the one with the faded "World's Best Dad" inscription their daughter gave him 20 years ago. "Do you want orange juice?" she asked softly. A pause. Then, without looking up, "Sure." That was it. That was the only exchange of words between them that morning. And yet, this scene had played out countless times. She spoke. He responded. But somewhere along the line, the words stopped meaning anything. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Grace sat down across from him, cupping her own coffee, letting the steam warm her face. She studied him, his thinning hair, the deep lines around his mouth, the slight tremor in his hand as he turned the page. There was a time she knew those hands intimately, every gesture, every habit. Now they just looked foreign. She took a slow sip. In her chest, something heavy shifted. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just a quiet resignation. The kind that comes when you finally admit to yourself that the person you love has become a stranger who sleeps beside you. If I didn't make breakfast tomorrow, she thought, would he notice? Or would he just make toast himself and never mention it? The scary part wasn't the thought of being alone. It was the realization that she already was. In the hallway, her suitcase sat quietly by the door, small, navy blue, and neatly zipped. She told Michael she was going to visit Emily for the weekend, maybe catch up with her old college roommate Susan. Just a short trip, a little break from the house. But inside the suitcase was more than just clothes. It held printed bank statements, a copy of their mortgage agreement, and an untouched divorce petition downloaded from a legal site she'd been visiting at night when Michael was asleep. Grace didn't know if she'd sign it yet. She hadn't made up her mind. But the fact that she had packed it at all, that she had chosen this day to leave, meant something had changed. Something irreversible. As Michael scraped his chair back, gathering his empty plate and mug, he paused only to say, "Drive safe." She nodded. "I will." And that was that. The door clicked shut behind her. And for the first time in 35 years, Grace Wallace stepped out into the world with no plan but one: to figure out who she was, without him. It didn't happen in one big fight. There were no slammed doors, no screaming matches, no dramatic ultimatums. Instead, their marriage died the way grass withers in the shade, slowly, quietly, from lack of sunlight. There was a time when Grace and Michael talked about everything. Where to vacation, how to parent Emily and Jake, what to do when Grace's father was diagnosed with cancer. They used to fall asleep mid-conversation, still holding hands. But somewhere between their children growing up and Michael's retirement party, the conversations changed. No, they vanished. "Did you book the dental appointment?" Grace would ask. Michael, eyes still on his laptop, would grunt, "Already did." Dinner questions turned into yes, no answers. Weekend plans became one-word replies. "Ted and Maria invited us over this Saturday." A shrug. "Up to you. It's Emily's birthday next week. Should we do something special?" "She's 29. She's not expecting a pony." At first, Grace thought he was just tired. He had spent decades in engineering, long hours, brutal deadlines. Maybe he was decompressing, adjusting to retirement. So, she waited. She gave him space. She even suggested they take a trip, just the two of them. His response? "I just want to stay home. Travel's exhausting." But home wasn't home anymore. It was a house with two ghosts. Grace tried to initiate. She asked about the books he read, the documentaries he watched. But he'd respond with a few vague words and then retreat back into his armchair, remote in hand. See, the TV filled the silence he didn't even notice. For Grace, it was deafening. Sometimes she would leave her phone in the kitchen just to see if he'd notice she hadn't answered a call or text in hours. He didn't. The worst part wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't. He never asked how she slept, or if her back still hurt after gardening. He didn't compliment her new haircut. He didn't remember their anniversary dinner, twice. And yet, he wasn't cruel. He wasn't unfaithful. He wasn't violent. He was indifferent, which somehow felt worse. One night, she stood at the bedroom doorway, holding a folded brochure in her hand. "Michael," she said, "I found a place that does couples counseling. Just once a week. Nothing intense. Maybe it could help." Michael looked up from his book, puzzled. "Help what?" She hesitated. "Us." He chuckled, gentle, dismissive. "Grace, we've been married 35 years. We're fine." She smiled politely, nodded, and tucked the brochure into her nightstand drawer. She never brought it up again. But the silence grew louder. It filled their kitchen, their car rides, their Sunday afternoons. And inside that silence, Grace's thoughts grew sharp. He's a good man, she'd remind herself. He never raised his voice, never cheated. He's always provided for the family. But another voice, the one she kept locked away, whispered back, "Being ignored isn't kindness. It's erasure." Then came the night that changed everything. Grace had made his favorite dish, chicken pot pie from scratch, just like his mother used to. She even found the old ceramic dish she hadn't used in years. She set the plate in front of him. Michael took a bite, chewed. Nothing. She waited. "Is it okay?" He muttered, not looking up. "Tastes fine." She stared at him. Her fingers clenched the edge of her napkin. Fine. That was the word he used when their son totaled his car. That was the word he used when Grace buried her mother. That was the word he used now, for a dish that took her 3 hours and a whole afternoon of memories to make. She stood up. "I'm going for a walk." "Need a coat?" he asked, still not looking up. "No," she said. "I need a conversation." That night, Grace sat on the porch swing, looking up at the stars. She remembered how, early in their marriage, they used to lie on this very swing, making up stories about constellations. Back then, silence had been companionable. Now, it was a wall. A week later, she started packing the suitcase. Not because she was angry, not because she had a final straw, but because she couldn't remember the last time she felt seen. And that, more than anything, broke her heart. Silence doesn't scream. It seeps. It fills the space between two people until they're no longer partners, just polite strangers sharing a roof. Grace didn't want fireworks. She just wanted him to ask, "How was your day?" To say, "You look beautiful tonight." To listen without scrolling. To remember who she was beneath the roles of mother, cook, caretaker, wife. But he didn't. And so, quietly, just as quietly as the silence that had crept into their lives, Grace began to slip away. Grace Wallace had always been the kind of woman who left notes. Post-its on the fridge. "Don't forget your 2-1 dentist." Little cards in his suitcase. "Come back safe. I'll miss you." Birthday cards tucked under pillows. Grocery lists categorized by aisle. Reminders on calendars. Reminders on reminders. But that morning, she left nothing. No note. No voicemail. Not even a text. She simply rolled her small navy suitcase to the front door, zipped up her jacket, and quietly stepped out. To Michael, it would just be another weekend. She told him she was visiting Emily in New Jersey, maybe catching up with Susan, her college roommate. He had barely nodded. "Text when you get there," was all he said, eyes on the morning paper. She had smiled. Of course. But in truth, she didn't know where she was going. Inside her suitcase, tucked between socks and nightgowns, was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope, printed copies of their joint bank statements, a draft divorce petition, the name of a family law attorney in Hartford, a list titled, "Who am I, if not his wife?" With only 2 items filled in, a teacher, a reader of bedtime stories. She hadn't made her final decision yet. Not officially, not aloud, but she had realized something terrifying the week before. She couldn't remember what she liked anymore. Not in the small ways, her favorite meal, her favorite color, but in the deep, soul-defining ways. What made her laugh so hard she cried? What books lit her up inside? What did she believe in, fight for, hope for? For 35 years, she had built her life around her family, her children, her husband, her roles. Now that the children were grown and Michael was distant, the house had become a shrine to a version of herself she no longer recognized. The train ride to New Jersey was quiet. She sat by the window, watching towns blur into fields, into rivers, into cities. Across the aisle, a young couple giggled over a crossword puzzle. She watched as the man leaned over, kissed the woman's cheek, and whispered something that made her laugh out loud. Grace looked away. It wasn't jealousy. It was mourning. Not for what they had, but for what she had lost. Or maybe, what had never truly existed. By the time she arrived at Susan's apartment, the sky had dimmed. Susan greeted her with a long, warm hug and a bottle of red wine. "You okay?" Susan asked gently. Grace nodded. "I think so. You look like a woman about to jump off a cliff." Grace let out a small, bitter laugh. "I feel like one." Over dinner, Grace finally opened up. "I packed a divorce petition," she said quietly. "I haven't signed it. I don't know if I will." Susan poured more wine, waited. Grace continued. "Michael hasn't done anything wrong. He doesn't drink, doesn't cheat, doesn't yell. But it's like living with a television that's always on but never tuned to your channel." Susan winced. "That's lonelier than being alone." Grace nodded, eyes wet. "I used to think I was being dramatic. Like, how dare I feel unloved when I have a roof over my head and someone who takes out the trash? But lately, I can't shake the feeling that I'm just fading, not dying, just disappearing. Susan reached for her hand. You're not disappearing, Grace. You're finally being seen. By you. That's the first step. That night, Grace lay on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling fan spin in lazy circles. Michael had texted her. Made pasta. Leftovers in fridge. Safe drive. She stared at the screen, reread the message 3 times. Nothing cruel. Nothing warm. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened the Notes app on her phone and began typing. A new list. Favorite flower. Peonies. Favorite place. The library on Broad Street. Favorite memory. Reading The Secret Garden to Emily in a Blanket Fort. Favorite sound. The crackle of a record player with each word. Something inside her began to stir. Not loudly, but undeniably. The next morning, she stood by Susan's window, holding a cup of tea, watching sunlight warm the skyline. I always thought if I ever left him, it would be after a fight, she said. After some betrayal. Something big. Susan smiled. The biggest betrayal is when someone stops seeing you. Grace blinked hard. And maybe when you stop seeing yourself. She didn't know what she would do yet. She hadn't signed the papers. But for the first time in a very long time, Grace wasn't waiting for permission to feel, to leave, to become. She didn't know where this road led, but she was finally walking it. Susan Harper had been married for 28 years. And then, one Tuesday morning, she packed 2 suitcases, left a note on the kitchen table, and walked out of the only life she'd known. To the outside world, Susan's divorce had looked sudden. But to Grace, it was like watching a butterfly emerge from a cocoon woven from decades of silence. Now, sitting across from Susan in her cozy Brooklyn apartment, with bookshelves to the ceiling, watercolor paintings on the wall, and jazz humming softly in the background, Grace saw something radiant in her friend's eyes that she hadn't seen in years. Peace. They sat with their second cups of tea, the kind of silence between them that was soft, safe, and earned. Grace finally spoke. How did you know? Susan didn't ask. Know what? She knew exactly what Grace meant. That I was done? Susan shrugged. I didn't. Not at first. I just started realizing how small I had become in my own home. Like I was always walking on tiptoe inside my own life. Grace nodded slowly. That's exactly it. I feel like a guest. Or worse, like I'm invisible. Susan leaned forward, her voice calm but steady. You remember that watercolor class I wanted to take? She asked. Grace smiled. You talked about it for years. Susan laughed softly. I finally signed up after I left him. First time I walked into that studio, I felt like I'd just come up for air after being underwater for 30 years. She paused, eyes distant. One day, I was painting this little cabin in the woods, and the instructor said, You paint like someone who's afraid to take up space. And I just started crying, because that's exactly how I'd been living. Grace felt a knot form in her throat. I don't even know what I like anymore, she admitted. When I got on the train yesterday, I realized I don't remember the last time I made a decision just for me. Susan nodded gently. That's not your fault. We were taught to be good wives. Supportive. Steady. Low maintenance. Somewhere along the line, we confused love with self-erasure. Grace's eyes welled. Michael's not a bad man. He doesn't hurt me. He's just not really with me. That, Susan said, can be the loneliest kind of marriage. They moved to the couch. Susan handed Grace an old photo album, snapshots from college, camping trips, awkward fashion, late-night pizza runs. "You were fearless back then," Susan said, pointing at a picture of Grace mid-laugh, balancing on a fallen tree. "I was," Grace whispered. "Where did she go?" "She didn't go anywhere," Susan said. "You just stopped listening to her." That afternoon, Susan took her to a small gallery where her watercolor class had a mini exhibit. Grace stood in front of a painting of a woman walking alone through a snow-covered field. The woman was facing away from the viewer, coat billowing, her footsteps the only mark on the blank canvas. "That's mine," Susan said quietly. Grace stared at it, heart pounding. "I call it the first step," Susan said, "because that's always the hardest. But once you take it, you realize the snow isn't empty. It's freedom." That night, over dinner, Susan opened a bottle of wine and poured generously. "Grace," she said, lifting her glass, "to second chances, not with men, but with ourselves." Grace clinked her glass softly. "To remembering who we are." They drank. They laughed. They cried. And sometime after midnight, as they sat barefoot on the balcony with blankets over their legs and the city lights sparkling below, Susan said the words that would echo in Grace's heart for weeks to come. "You don't owe anyone your silence, your comfort, or your life. You owe yourself the chance to be whole." Grace didn't sign the divorce petition that night. She didn't even open the envelope. But when she went to bed, she dreamed not of Michael, or the house, or the kitchen she'd kept spotless for 35 years. She dreamed of peonies blooming in wild, defiant color. She dreamed of bookstores and record players. She dreamed of laughing in the rain, alone but not lonely. She dreamed of herself. And when she woke up, she realized maybe Susan wasn't the only one ready for a second beginning. Michael Wallace didn't panic when Grace left for the weekend. At first, he barely noticed. He enjoyed the quiet, the remote control all to himself, the freedom to eat cereal for dinner and leave the dishes in the sink. Retirement had taught him to appreciate solitude. At least, that's what he told himself. But by the second day, something shifted. He woke up and the bed beside him was cold, still made, still empty. He opened the fridge and realized there was no leftover chicken. No little sticky note that read, "Remember, trash day." No soft humming from the laundry room. No warm scent of her coffee blend brewing before sunrise. He walked through the house and felt it, a hollow echo. That night, he sat in front of the TV with a microwave dinner and a glass of wine. The house creaked. A silence settled, not peaceful, not still, but thick, suffocating. He found himself flipping through the channels, not watching anything. His phone buzzed. It wasn't Grace. He stared at it, then set it down. It buzzed again. This time, it was his old friend Tom. "Tom, Grace out of town?" "Michael." "Yeah, visiting Emily." "Tom, you okay?" "Michael." "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" The reply didn't come for a few minutes. Then, "Tom, because my wife did the same thing. Before she filed." Michael stared at the screen for a long time. The next morning, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied his face. The deepening lines, the sag in his shoulders, the tired eyes. He saw a man who had spent 40 years building a career, 2 successful children, and a mortgage-free home. A man who had thought that providing and protecting were the only ways to love. He had been proud of his reliability, his consistency. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped being present. In a rare act of spontaneity, Michael grabbed his jacket and walked 3 blocks down to a small florist he passed every week but never entered. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside. A young woman behind the counter looked up. "Can I help you?" He hesitated. I'm looking for flowers. For my wife." She smiled. "Anniversary?" He paused. "No, she's just away. And I thought, maybe it's time." The florist led him around, pointing out arrangements. He stopped in front of a bouquet of pink and white dahlias. "They're beautiful," he said softly. "They are," she nodded. "Dahlias symbolize dignity, inner strength, grace." Michael blinked. "Grace," he repeated. "That's her name." The florist smiled wider. "Then it's perfect." He bought the bouquet, asked for it to be wrapped in brown paper. On the card, he wrote, "I'm sorry I forgot what matters." Back home, he sat with the flowers on the kitchen table, staring at them like they were some kind of alien language. He poured himself another glass of wine. His thoughts churned. He remembered their first apartment, how she used to hum while folding laundry, the time she waited in the pouring rain to pick him up from a business trip because he lost his keys, the way she used to leave notes in his lunchbox with ridiculous knock-knock jokes. When had those things stopped? Or worse, when had he stopped noticing them? Later that evening, he pulled out an old photo album. One of the pages held a faded picture of Grace at the beach, her hair wild in the wind, her smile full and unguarded. He didn't recognize that smile anymore. Not because it had changed, but because he had stopped earning it. The next day, he cleaned the house. Not just tidied, he vacuumed, scrubbed the stovetop, even did laundry. He Googled how to fold towels the hotel way. Not because he thought it would fix anything, but because for the first time in a long time, he wanted to contribute. He made her favorite pasta dish, fettuccine with lemon, garlic, and parmesan, and lit a candle in the middle of the table. Then he waited. Hours passed. No call. No reply to his earlier text. The wine in his glass stayed untouched. The flowers sat between them like a peace offering, written in a language he hoped she still understood. And in the silence of that long evening, Michael Wallace, practical, quiet, unshakable, finally admitted something he had never said out loud. "I'm scared." He didn't know if the flowers would change anything. He didn't know if she would come back. But for the first time in years, he wasn't asking what she could do for him. He was asking, who have I become? And more importantly, is it too late to change? Grace didn't expect the flowers. She found them on the kitchen table when she returned late Sunday afternoon, still wrapped in brown paper, the scent of dahlias filling the air like a question waiting to be answered. The note was simple. "I'm sorry I forgot what matters." Boom. She held it in her hand for a long time, fingers trembling. A part of her wanted to cry. Another part only felt tired. Michael emerged from the hallway, hair a little disheveled, shirt half tucked, like a man caught in a memory he didn't know how to leave. "I didn't know when you'd be back," he said. "But I made dinner. Your favorite lemon fettuccine." Grace didn't move. "You remembered," she said softly. "I Googled the recipe," he confessed. "Tried 3 times. The first batch turned to glue." That made her smile, just barely. He took a step closer. "Grace, I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything I've ignored." She looked up, eyes steady. "And I want to change. I want to do better. I don't want to lose you." Her chest tightened. Her hands found the edge of the counter behind her, grounding her. "I believe you," she said. Hope flickered in his eyes. but I've already lost myself." They sat down across from each other at the kitchen table. No wine, no music, no small talk. Just air thick with years of unsaid things. Grace took a deep breath. "I waited for this moment for so long," she began. "For you to notice. To ask. To try. And now that it's here, I feel nothing but ache." Michael's brow furrowed. "But I'm here now. I'm trying." "I know," she said. "But do you know how many nights I cried in the shower so you wouldn't hear me? How many dinners I made hoping for a thank you that never came? I thought you knew how I felt," he said. "I always believed actions mattered more than words. But you stopped acting. You stopped everything." He swallowed. "I didn't realize." "I begged without speaking," she whispered. "Because that's what women like me were taught to do. Keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Wait for the man to lead." Michael looked down. She continued. "But waiting turned me into a shadow." He leaned forward. "I love you, Grace." "Then tell me," she said, voice steady. "What's my favorite color?" He blinked. "Blue? Pink. Soft blush pink. The color of the sky just before sunrise." He nodded slowly. "My favorite flower? Those?" He pointed to the dahlias. "No. Peonies. Always peonies. I love their wildness, their softness and strength." His hands curled around his glass, knuckles white. She wasn't finished. "When do I feel happiest?" He hesitated. "With the kids? When we're all together." She shook her head. "Reading stories to children at the library. Seeing their eyes light up when the dragon roars or the princess wins." She paused. "You've slept beside me for 35 years, but you never saw me." Michael's voice cracked. "I thought I did. I thought what we had was stable, safe." Grace leaned back in her chair, her face a mix of sorrow and clarity. "That was the problem," she said. "You thought love meant routine. I wanted curiosity. You gave me security. I needed presence." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "I don't hate you, Michael," she said gently. "But I can't stay. I can't keep shrinking just to fit inside this marriage." His eyes filled. "Please, just one more chance." Her voice broke. "You had thousands." The silence that followed was different than the ones before. Not cold, not empty, final. Grace stood. "I'll be staying at Emily's for now. I need space. I need me." He rose too, unsure of what to do with his hands, his mouth, his grief. "I'll wait," he said. She smiled, bittersweet. "Don't." She picked up the flowers and carried them out, not as a token of reconciliation, but as a reminder that someone finally saw her, even if too late. Michael stood at the window, watching her drive away. He had waited too long to speak, and now all he could hear was the sound of her silence, finally answered. The guest room at Emily's apartment wasn't fancy. A small twin bed, a desk cluttered with grad school papers, and a window that overlooked the parking lot. But to Grace, it felt like a palace. She woke up that first morning to the smell of fresh coffee and her daughter's soft humming in the kitchen. No to-do list, no early breakfast to prepare, no dishwasher humming in the background. Just stillness. For a moment, it unnerved her. Then she exhaled and let the quiet fill her bones. Emily watched her mother closely the first week. She didn't pry, didn't demand explanations. She just let her be. Until one night, over tea, Grace finally spoke. "I left your father," Emily nodded. I figured, I don't know if it's permanent. Emily smiled gently. I think you do. They talked late into the night. Grace told her about the years of feeling invisible, of conversations that went nowhere, of dinners that turned into silence, of waiting, and breaking. Emily listened, eyes full, hands steady. You always made it look easy, she said softly. Being a mom, a wife, holding everything together. I had no idea how heavy it was. Grace laughed, a little sad, a little free. Neither did I, until I put it down. In the weeks that followed, Grace didn't rush to figure things out. She started walking every morning, earbuds in, listening to audiobooks and 70s soul music. She volunteered twice a week at the local library, helping with a children's story hour. The first time she read Where the Wild Things Are Allowed, a little boy grabbed her hand and whispered, "You sound like the lady from the cartoons." She cried the whole way home, not from sadness, but from remembering a part of herself she thought was lost. One Saturday, Susan invited her to a watercolor class in the city. Grace hesitated. Then she said yes. She wasn't very good. Her sunflowers looked more like wet pancakes, but she laughed more in 2 hours than she had in months. That night, she bought herself a set of brushes. And in the next week, she went alone. She opened a new checking account, got her own health insurance, looked at rental listings. She made lists, not for groceries, not for errands, but for things she wanted to try. Visit Maine in the fall, learn how to bake sourdough, take a solo train trip to Chicago, dye her hair, something bold, maybe Auburn host. A book club where no one pretends they finished the book one night. She found an old journal she hadn't touched in years. The first page said, "I want more." She underlined it, then added, "And I deserve it." Michael called sometimes. He was never angry, just quiet, unsure. "I made your lemon pasta last night," he said once. "It wasn't the same without you." Another time, "The house is clean, but it doesn't feel like home." She listened. She didn't interrupt, but she didn't go back. One afternoon, Emily came home to find her mother dancing barefoot in the living room to earth, wind and fire. "Mom!" She laughed. Grace didn't stop. She spun once, twice, arms wide. "I forgot how good this song is," she said, breathless. Emily joined her. 2 women, 2 generations, learning how to live freely, together. That night, as they sat on the fire escape with mugs of mint tea, Emily said something that stuck. You know what's wild? Watching you become someone new. Most people your age just settle. But you're blooming. Grace looked out at the city lights, a soft smile on her lips. "I'm not becoming someone new," she said. "I'm finally being who I've always been." Michael Wallace didn't know what to do with the quiet anymore. At first, it was tolerable, predictable. Then it became unbearable. He had always believed in order, routines, predictability, logic. But grief didn't follow rules. Loneliness didn't come in straight lines. It crept. Into the bed he made each morning. Into the dinner for one he reheated. Into the voicemail box he checked too often. He walked past her closet one afternoon and stopped. Half of it was still full. Not because she hadn't packed. Grace had always kept things minimal. But the hangers, the soft scent of her favorite lotion, the pair of reading glasses still sitting on the nightstand, they haunted him. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the spot she used to sleep. He hadn't cried when she left. He cried now. He started reading books she left behind. Memoirs, novels, even that dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden she used to read to Emily. He found a note tucked inside. "This story makes me feel seen." He pressed the paper to his chest, as if hoping it could undo the years of not seeing her. One evening, he opened the spice cabinet and stared blankly. He was making dinner, trying to replicate the lemon fettuccine. He reached for a jar, only to realize he didn't know which seasoning Grace always used to finish the dish. Something with a citrusy warmth. Was it thyme? Tarragon? He didn't know. He had eaten that meal 100 times, praised it maybe once. He never asked how she made it. He stood there for a long time, holding the wrong jar. Later that week, he wandered into a small bookstore downtown. He found himself in the poetry section, something he'd never read. A staff member, noticing his confusion, asked, "Looking for someone in particular?" "No," he said. "Looking for understanding. I think." She handed him a slim volume by Mary Oliver. The poem he opened to read. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" He bought the book and read it cover to cover that night. He began writing again. Letters, notes, mostly to her. He didn't send them, just folded them into a box labeled, "Grace, if she ever wants to know." In one letter, he wrote, "You were never invisible. I just didn't know how to look beyond myself." In another, "I used to believe loyalty was enough. I stayed. I provided. I protected. But I forgot to cherish." Michael didn't beg for her return. He knew better now. Instead, he began learning how to be alone and how to live with the consequences of his absence, even when he was physically present. He joined a grief support group, not for widowers, but for men in transition. Most of them were divorced. A few were widowed. All of them were afraid. In one session, he said, "She didn't leave because she stopped loving me. She left because I stopped showing her she mattered." The room went still. A man across from him nodded. "That's the most honest thing I've heard all year." Sometimes, he saw her name in the contact list on his phone and hovered over it. He typed texts, deleted them. Once, he wrote, "The house is quieter than ever, but I finally hear you now." He didn't send it. Instead, every month, on the same day, he sent her flowers. Always peonies. No card, no message, just the flowers she loved. Just in case she ever needed to know, someone remembered. One day, at the supermarket, he saw a woman laugh, head thrown back, no restraint. It reminded him of Grace, years ago. He smiled. It didn't hurt as much anymore. Because now, when he thought of her, he didn't think of silence or regret. He thought of her freedom, and he hoped she was using it well. It had been 3 months since Grace left. The peonies arrived like clockwork, every month, on the same day, from the same florist. She never replied, never acknowledged them, but she always placed them in a vase on the windowsill, letting them bloom and wilt on their own time, much like she had. Grace had moved into a small apartment above a bakery in a quiet neighborhood. The floors creaked, the walls were thin, and the oven took forever to heat, but it was hers. She painted the walls a soft blush pink, the color Michael had never known she loved. She bought herself new sheets, crisp, white, with a touch of lavender. She spent weekends rearranging bookshelves, attending art fairs, and hosting a tiny book club of other women in their 60s rediscovering who they were without husbands or children to orbit around. One night, while walking home from the library, she paused at a street musician playing a cello. The melody wrapped around her like memory, and for the first time in years, she felt light. She dropped a few bills into the open case, smiled, and kept walking. Michael had learned how to live with the silence. He cooked. He cleaned. He even started volunteering twice a week, reading at a senior center, helping organize community gardens. The same hands that once tightened bolts and solved engineering equations now sowed seeds and turned pages. He no longer filled his days with distraction. He let the emptiness be what it was, a reminder, a teacher. He sent one final letter, not to beg, not to explain, just to say thank you. Grace, the other day I bought the wrong brand of tea. You always knew which one I liked. I never even noticed until I tasted the difference. There are 1,000 things I wish I had asked. 1,000 more I wish I had said. But most of all, I wish I had listened. I'm not writing to change your mind. I'm writing to say I understand now. That I see you, clearly, finally. And that wherever life takes you, I hope it's somewhere beautiful. You deserve that. Always. Michael Grace read the letter in silence. She folded it neatly and placed it inside a journal titled Second Beginnings. She didn't cry. She smiled. On what would have been their 36th anniversary, Grace stood in the children's section of the library, reading The Secret Garden to a group of wide-eyed kids. When she read the line, "Where you tend a rose, a thistle cannot grow," she paused, just for a beat, feeling something settle deep inside her. Later that day, she walked past a florist and, on impulse, bought herself a bouquet of peonies. She took them home, placed them in the same vase. And this time, they were from her, to her. Michael stood by his kitchen window, sipping coffee from a chipped mug Grace had once bought at a roadside market. Outside, the garden he'd started was blooming. Not perfectly, but earnestly. In the middle of it, a single peony had begun to open. He didn't know how it got there. Maybe a stray seed. Maybe fate. Maybe just grace. He didn't need to know. He smiled and went back to watering. They didn't end up back together, but they ended up where they belonged. This story isn't just about divorce. It's about silence. The kind that creeps in between two people who once promised forever, until thank you becomes so what, and love becomes routine. Grace's journey teaches us something deeply human. People don't leave because they stop loving. They leave because they stop being seen, heard, and appreciated. For decades, she poured herself into being the perfect wife and mother, but forgot to be something even more important, herself. Her husband, Mason, wasn't abusive, cruel, or unfaithful. He was simply absent, present in body, but not in heart. And that's what makes this story so universal. It reminds us that emotional neglect is just as painful as any loud argument. That saying, "Thank you," "How was your day?" or "I see you" might seem small, but they're the threads that keep a marriage from unraveling. It also challenges us to think, are we truly connecting with the people closest to us? Or are we just going through the motions? And finally, Grace reminds us it's never too late. Not to change, not to walk away, not to choose your own happiness, even after 35 years. Whether you're married, divorced, or somewhere in between, this story is a mirror. And sometimes, looking into that mirror is the bravest thing we can do. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without letting us know. Have you ever felt invisible in your own relationship? Or maybe you've seen someone close to you go through a quiet heartbreak like Grace's. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your story. Someone out there might need it more than you think. If you found this video meaningful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss tomorrow's story. It's one you won't want to miss.